I'm David Noble, welcome to the channel. Now, if you've not heard the latest storm to hit the F1 world this week regarding Alpine's reserve and academy driver Oscar Piastri, you've either just not really into racing or you've been stranded on a desert island, in which case congratulations on your rescue. A little bit of the backstory anyway, just because it makes my script look longer when I do a word count. Oscar Piastri, 21 years old, from East Brighton in Melbourne, Australia. He's been a member of the Renault Academy since 2020, having won the Formula Renault Euro Cup Championship that year. This season, having won everything he could do on the way up, he was contracted as the Alpine Test and Reserve driver, and as well as being the simulator jockey and giving feedback to the engineers to provide him with some seat time, he's been doing some private testing in the Alpine A521 F1 car. In fact, Alpine have been doing everything they can to try and get Oscar seat time, including signing a deal with McLaren on 14th March 2022 for him to be one of their reserve drivers as well. And wouldn't you know it, McLaren apparently quite liked the look of the lad, as during early summer they entered contract negotiations with Oscar's manager Mark Webber to see if Oscar would be willing to join their growing roster of drivers. Now, at this point, I'm not intentionally saying that Alonso screwed Alpine, but the timing couldn't have been worse for them. Sebastian Vettel announces his retirement from Formula One, and out of the blue, Fernando signs with Aston Martin to replace him. 2 days after, Oscar Piastri's contract as a reserve driver for Alpine expires, and the day after McLaren sign him. It should be stated at this point that McLaren and Oscar's management were unlikely to have known that Alonso was in talks with Aston. It's not like Alonso worked with Oscar, or used to race Oscar's manager, or used to be managed by the same guy that manages Oscar's manager. Tinfoil hat conspiracies aside, as fun as it is to speculate, the end result was that Alpine, though, still thought they could call on their 21-year-old that they'd invested heavily in over the years, and was still of the opinion they had an option on Oscar, so that he was going to drive for them in 2023. Even Michael Schumacher had to have one race in F1 before teams started fighting over him. Oscar fired back on Twitter that he wouldn't be driving for Alpine in 2023, and it all ended up in front of the FIA, who said no, in a poor French accent apparently, to Alpine. So why are two teams fighting over him this much? Jack Aitken has driven more Grand Prix than Oscar at this point. The short version can be seen in Oscar's Twitter bio, champion, and champion. Very good. But this video would be very short if I left it there, so let's take a closer look. Like so many young drivers from Asia and Australasia, Oscar moved to Europe at the age of 14, having won everything in karting in his native country. If you want to be a future F1 star, Europe is kind of where you have to end up. Leaving his family and friends behind and travelling to the other side of the planet to go to boarding school was one of the moments that Oscar has said helped shaping into the person he is, because he had to grow a lot as a result. The standards of talent in European karting was significantly higher than he had previously raced against, but he still did respectably in 2016, racing in CIK European Championships, VSK Final Cup and Supermaster Series before finishing 6th from an entry list of over 90 drivers in the CIK World Championships. 2017 was his first adventure in slicks and wings single-seaters, with selected rounds of the UAE F4 Championship where he took 2 podiums, and then the main thing is competing in that year, the British F4 Championship. Now, for those who don't know, British F4 isn't seen as being the same level perhaps as German or Italian F4, but the sharp end of it is still very competitive, and that season was no exception. The series was won by Jamie Caroline, who I consider to be one of the biggest lost talents in racing. But other full season entries included Logan Sargent, Alex Quinn, Ayrton Simmons, Linus Lundqvist and Patrick Pasner. Caroline walked it in the end, taking 10 wins and 16 podiums. But 8 of them wins were right at the start of the season, and Oscar, who took second in the title, was very much the strongest driver at the end of the year, with 6 wins and more poles than anyone else. 2018 would potentially be a bit of a struggle season, it's all relative. Moving up to Formula Renault, 2018 with Arden was a tough ask, because Arden aren't as strong on the continent as they were domestically, and it was a very good grid. Some good big names in it. An 8th place finish in the championship, therefore, was pretty respectable, really. For 2019, he stayed in the Formula Renault Championship, but the cars were changing, which meant second-year drivers didn't have the advantage of familiarity with the machinery that they normally would have. That said, all the top 4 in the championship that season were second-year drivers, so maybe that's not a correct statement. The move to the RSGP team, though, would see him partnered with Alexis Smollier and Kaya Collet, and would see a season-long fight with Renault Junior driver Victor Martins, where the pair of them were the class of the field, and it could have gone either way. Piastri would win with 320 points and 7 wins, but Martins, on 312.5 points, had more podiums and poles. So, after 3 years in open wheel racing, he'd finished with second in F4 and a win in Formula Renault. Not bad at all, but only really getting started. The 2020 Formula 3 season was very tight, but it was messed up before it started with the delay to the season from COVID, which meant 3 rounds getting cancelled and a large gap between testing and the first race of the season. What occurred as a result was an incredibly close fight that could have seen any one of 4 drivers take the title. I mean, we talk about Pramatex in F3, and 3 of the 4 championship leaders were the Prema drivers. But in the 18 races that season, 9 drivers won races. We had a 3-way fight for the championship going into the last race, and it looked like Oscar, due to starting further back, was an outside shout. Logan Sargent's chances were wiped out in a first lap crash. Teo Pourchaire fought his way up to 3rd, but Oscar managed to get from 11th to 7th, meaning he took the title with 164 points from Pourchaire on 161 and Sargent on 160. So going into the 2021 F2 season, Oscar had taken 2 championships in 2 years, but neither were easy, and while he had been impressive, so had several drivers. We're expecting good things from him in F2, but there was a strong contingent of second season drivers, not least his teammate Robert Schwartzman, who was the 2019 F3 champion and had put in some good performances in F2 the previous year. There were changes at the structure at the weekend as well, with it going to a 3-race format. 2 of the races being reverse grid races, and race 2 positions depending on the results of race 1, so it called for consistency and staying out of trouble, which Oscar did very well in the early part of the season to score regular points. In the second half of the year, though, he found another level. In the first half, it had been an interesting title fight between several drivers, but the final rounds were all Piastri. He secured feature race pole in all 5 of the final rounds, taking 4 feature race wins to finish the season 60.5 points clear from Schwartzman in second. And he did that when the eyes of the F1 paddock were on him. Teams watch F2 and F3, they share the same weekend as F1, and becoming the first rookie to take the F2 title since George Russell in 2018, and by some margin had fans crying out in complaint that he hadn't got a 2022 seat. There isn't a debate that Oscar deserves an F1 seat. It's not really an issue about him driving for McLaren, as, he seems to have been out of contract with Alpine at the time, and while it sucks for Ricciardo, he hadn't been performing the way that he or McLaren had hoped. And, if the merry-go-round means that he ends up back at Alpine, a team he looked good at before leaving on his McLaren adventure, then that could be good for him. The main problem is the way that it's all come to light. We're not sure what would have been said behind closed doors, but Alonso dropping his no-notice bombshell pushed Alpine into rushed statements they could support, pushed Oscar into making a statement that wasn't prepared, and meant that the talking deals and processes that would have taken place to ensure everyone was as on board as they were going to be haven't happened. So Daniel's yet to comment as far as I've seen up to this point. So nothing's been confirmed with him, and there are apparently 4 odd teams that have been wanting to talk to him. But the fact you only have to go 2 posts down on his Twitter to see his post about being committed to McLaren until the end of next year, which he posted on 13th of July, is an awkward reminder of how quickly everything has been thrown up in the air. All we can say is hopefully all parties will end up happy in the end, but it does serve to remind us how much of a ruthless sport F1 is and how nothing is certain. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. As always, thank you for watching. There'll be more Racing Day vlogs coming up over the next few weeks, but in the meantime, bye bye for now.